My name is Meridian Hale, and I turned 70 last spring. People in Burlington say I age like the maples, steadily, a little crooked and stubbornly rooted. I've lived in the same cedar-sided house for 40 years through long winters and long silences. These days, I fill both with small things that still make sense. Morning tea steeped until it bites the squeak of the porch swing, the sound of leaves scraping the steps when the wind forgets itself. This morning, I was out front with a box of pumpkins. The air smelled of wood smoke and cider, the kind of crispness that reminds you life can still feel new, even after 70 years. I lined the pumpkins in neat rows, one for every grandchild who usually trampled up these steps in plastic masks. Rhea, my daughter, called them Mom's Orange Soldiers. I liked that image, something standing guard against the cold. After my husband passed 12 years ago, I learned that rituals matter more than reasons. Halloween became my favorite. Not for the candy or the noise, but because it gave me a script. I baked, I decorated, I made everything ready. People need reasons to come home, and holidays are good excuses. I was tying the autumn wreath oak leaves, cinnamon sticks, and tiny dried apples when the phone buzzed in my apron pocket. "Hi, Mom!" Rhea's voice burst through bright and sugary. "Good morning, sweetheart. You sound like you've had 3 coffees already." She laughed. 2.5? Listen, we're thinking about doing something big this Halloween. You know all the cousins together. I'll fill you in later, okay? Before I could ask anything, she added, "I knew you'd love that. You always make the best cocoa." Her voice carried the same hurried affection she used when asking favors, the kind that left no room for my opinion. I smiled anyway, twisting the wire behind the wreath until it bit my finger. A small drop of blood bloomed at the tip, bright against the orange leaves. We talked about the weather, the price of pumpkins, the grandkids' costumes. Rhea promised to call again soon, which in her vocabulary meant whenever plans were already decided. After the line went quiet, I stood for a while in the chill, listening to the rustle of leaves piling against the porch. The silence that followed her voice wasn't lonely. It was measured, the kind that knows better than to fill itself with noise. Inside the house smelled of nutmeg and old cedar. I set the phone down beside the teapot and checked the calendar pinned above the counter. October 31st was circled in orange ink. Beneath it, I'd written in neat letters, "Family 7 p.m. It felt comforting, then seeing it there like proof that belonging still existed if I just prepared hard enough. I didn't know yet that within a week, that little circle would mean something entirely different. The wind picked up outside, sweeping the last of the orange leaves across the porch, and somewhere deep inside me, something shifted with them. I reached for my mug and the phone buzzed again. 3 days passed after that first call, and the air turned colder, sharper, the kind that makes wind chimes ring like glass. I spent the morning trimming the hydrangeas out back, bundled in my husband's old flannel coat. It still smelled faintly of varnish and cedar, a scent that comforted me more than any candle ever could. The phone rang again just as I was washing the dirt from my hands. Rhea's name glowed across the screen, followed by a small heart emoji she'd added months ago. I smiled, but something in my chest tightened. Her calls never came in twos, unless there was something she wanted. "Hi, Mom." Her voice was bright again, syrupy and rushed. "Do you have a minute?" "Of course, sweetheart." I balanced the phone between my ear and shoulder, drying my hands on a towel. "So remember how I said we were planning something fun for Halloween," she began. "It's turning into a full-blown neighborhood party. We'll have kids everywhere. Mine, Nathan's nieces, a few from my book club, and the twins from across the street. You'll love them. They're adorable." I laughed softly, though I hadn't been asked to love anyone yet. "Sounds lively," I said. "Oh, it'll be chaos," she giggled. Which is why I was thinking, maybe I could drop the kids off a little early that day, around 3, just so they can settle before everyone comes. There it was, the shift in her tone. Polite, but rehearsed. 3 in the afternoon, I asked. Mm-hmm, she replied quickly. And you're just so good with them, Mom. They always have more fun at your place anyway. Nathan and I could swing by later after we finish setting up the adult tables. You wouldn't mind, right? Her words were coated in sugar, but I could taste the assumption underneath. I thought about last Thanksgiving, when helping with the turkey had turned into me cooking the entire meal, while she live posted about gratitude. Of course, I said after a pause that was long enough to be noticed, but not long enough to challenge her. Just let me know how many this time. Oh, just the usual, she said, which I knew meant at least 4 children, maybe more, depending on who had a piano lesson that day. I pressed the phone closer to my ear. And you'll pick them up before the party ends. There was a small laugh. Oh, Mom, you worry too much. We'll figure it out. Anyway, you're the best. I'll call again once I finalize everything. The line clicked off before I could reply. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the silent phone in my hand. Outside, a leaf brushed against the window and stuck there trembling in the wind. I poured myself another cup of tea and carried it to the dining table. The table was bare except for a few folded napkins and a ceramic bowl filled with candy corn. I'd bought it out of habit, not expectation. Sometimes I wondered when Rhea had learned that tone, the one that smiles as it takes. Maybe from me. Years of saying yes had taught her that my boundaries were flexible, that my time could stretch to fit her needs. I tried to remember the last time she had visited without an agenda just to sit and talk, or asked about my back pain or the garden. It must have been before Nathan's promotion, before the new house, before the kids grew into a small army. The wind outside lifted the chimes again. They sounded beautiful but hollow, echoing through the empty rooms. I set my cup down and reached for my calendar. On October 31st, beside the orange circle, I added 3 small words beneath Family 7. PM. Drop off 3. I stared at the note until the ink bled faintly into the paper. Then I closed the pen and walked to the window. The leaf that had clung there finally slipped free, carried away by the cold October air. By the weekend, the trees had turned completely scarlet, amber, and gold, folding over one another like pages in an old book. Burlington always wore October well. I decided to drive to Whitby's farm, the same pumpkin patch Rhea loved as a little girl. Every year, no matter how busy I'd take her there, let her pick the biggest pumpkin she could lift, and we'd carve it together on the porch. That smell of raw pumpkin and candle wax still felt like family to me. The gravel cracked under my shoes as I stepped from the car. The air was filled with laughter, camera clicks, and the faint tune of an accordion someone played near the hayrides. Families moved in every direction, toddlers wrapped in scarves, teenagers taking selfies under the wooden Harvest Days arch. I used to love scenes like this, the sound of everyone else's joy. Today, it only reminded me how easily I'd become part of other people's plans. Mrs. Hale, a voice called out. I turned to see Peter Callum, my next-door neighbor, his arms full of gourds. His wife waved from the cider stand. You out here shopping for the grandkids again? He teased. I smiled politely. Old habits. He laughed. You're a saint, Meridian. You always end up with everyone's kids. It was meant kindly, but something about the words stuck to me like the straw on my shoes. Everyone's kids. Not just Rhea's, not just mine, everyone's. After Peter left, I wandered through the rows of pumpkins, running my fingers over their cool, ridged surfaces. The air smelled of soil and cinnamon. A boy nearby was crying because his pumpkin had rolled away, and his mother sighed. You're fine, sweetie. I almost knelt to help before catching myself. Some reflexes die slower than others. I found a medium-sized pumpkin with a deep orange hue, not perfect, but solid, and set it gently in my basket. The wind swept through the field, tugging loose my scarf, and for a moment I heard Walter's voice clear, as if he were standing beside me again. He used to tease me about my need to say yes. "You're too good for your own peace, Mary," he'd say, tightening the lid on the paint can after another favor I'd agreed to. "One day someone's going to mistake your goodness for duty, and you'll let them." He'd died the year before Ria's third child was born, but his voice still knew how to find me even here among strangers. I brushed a bit of dirt from the pumpkin and whispered, "You were right, Walt." At the register, the cashier wrapped the pumpkin carefully in brown paper. "Big family celebration?" she asked. I hesitated, then smiled. Something like that. Driving home, the field lights faded in my rearview mirror until the world became only trees and sky again. The pumpkin sat steady on the passenger seat like silent company. For a brief second, I wished Ria could see how beautiful it all was. The calm, the gold of the evening light, but then I remembered the way her voice had sounded on the phone, too bright, too busy. By the time I reached my driveway, dusk had folded over the neighborhood. I carried the pumpkin inside, set it on the table, and stared at it until the porch light flickered on by itself. It glowed against the window, soft and orange, waiting for something I hadn't yet decided to give. The week before Halloween, the air in Burlington turned to glass. Even the lake looked colder, its surface holding that sharp, metallic light that comes before frost. I spent the morning baking oatmeal cookies with cranberries, Ria's favorite since she was a girl. It was meant to be a small gesture, something to say, "I'm thinking of you," before the chaos of the holiday began. By late afternoon, I wrapped the cookies in wax paper and tied the package with twine. Her house was only a 15-minute drive away, tucked in a newer neighborhood full of bright porches and identical fences. When I pulled into her driveway, plastic ghosts swung from the eaves and a pair of inflatable pumpkins smiled at me from the lawn. Everything looked cheerful, polished, and busy, just like Ria. I didn't call ahead. I wanted it to be a surprise. I still believed small surprises meant something. Inside, the lights were on, but the front hall was empty. The scent of cinnamon and detergent hung in the air. "Ria." I called softly, stepping past the shoe rack. No answer. I set the cookies on the console table and listened. Then I heard it, laughter, faint but clear, coming from upstairs. Ria's voice, light and quick, the same tone she used when she was trying to sound effortless. I started up the staircase, meaning to say hello, when her words floated down like ash. "Just dump all 9 kids on Mom, she won't say no." The words landed so sharply that I missed the next step. I froze, my hand gripping the railing. My heartbeat filled my ears, heavy and slow. She kept talking, unaware. "No, seriously, it's perfect. We'll drop them off early so they don't get in the way during setup. She loves it. She lives for this kind of thing. Trust me, she'll be thrilled." Someone laughed on the other end of the call, a muffled male voice, probably Nathan's. I couldn't move. I stared at the pattern on the wallpaper, the faint yellow flowers curling up like smoke. 9 kids. Not just her own 7 then. Probably her nieces, the neighbor twins. My chest tightened, a familiar ache that had no place anymore, and still it came. Ria laughed again, lower this time. "Oh, come on, she never complains. She's got more energy than any of us. Besides, we deserve a night to actually enjoy ourselves. She'll say yes, she always does." Something inside me, the quiet, patient part that had survived widowhood, birthdays, forgotten thank yous, cracked without a sound. I didn't make a noise. I didn't call her name. I simply turned one step at a time and walked back down the stairs. My legs felt heavy, my hands colder than the air outside. At the front door, I hesitated. The cookie tin sat on the console, a small, harmless gift that suddenly felt ridiculous. I picked it up, pressed it against my chest for a second, then carried it with me. Outside, the neighborhood was alive with children playing in yards, parents chatting near mailboxes, the scent of leaves burning somewhere close. I walked to my car as if nothing were wrong, though every sound around me The laughter, the running footsteps seemed to echo that same sentence, "She won't say no." When I closed the car door, the tin rattled in my lap. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked the same as always, but my face felt older. I started the engine, letting the heater hum softly, and stared at the house. Through the window, I could still see her silhouette moving upstairs, hand pressed to her phone. Smiling. I thought of all the times I had answered the door the nights I'd stayed up with crying babies, while she and Nathan went out the groceries I'd covered when she'd been between paychecks. I thought of every yes that had come from love and turned into duty. When I finally drove away, the sunset was fading into gray, and a thin layer of frost was forming on the windshield. I didn't turn on the radio. The road was quiet, just the hum of tires against the pavement. The cookies sat unopened beside me, still warm, their sweetness sealed away. By the time I reached my house, the streetlights had come on. I carried the tin inside, set it on the counter, and poured myself a glass of water. The first sip burned my throat. Then slowly, I unwrapped the cookies and placed them one by one into a jar. They were perfect, golden soft, made for sharing. But that night, I locked the jar, slid it onto the highest shelf, and left the kitchen light on. The streetlights were already blinking on when I turned onto Maple Avenue. The road curved downhill toward the lake, the pavement half hidden beneath a carpet of wet leaves. They stuck to the tires in soft, whispering layers. I kept the headlights low, watching the world blur past in orange and brown. The silence inside the car was thick, almost humming. I'd driven that route hundreds of times, school events, grocery runs, late-night emergencies, when Rhea forgot to buy cough syrup or milk. The steering wheel had the faint polish of years of use. My hands knew every turn, every bump in the asphalt. But tonight, it felt like I was driving through a memory I no longer recognized. The sentence kept looping in my head, steady as a drum. Just dump all 9 kids on Mom, she won't say no. 9 kids, 9 lives, 9 reasons to keep her mother busy while she enjoyed her own. I wanted to feel angry, but what I felt instead was older, something heavier and quieter, like the last light before dusk fades entirely. At a red light, I glanced at the cookie tin still resting on the passenger seat. It had cooled now, the twine slackened around its lid. The gesture had started as love, and somewhere between the oven and her doorway, it had turned into evidence proof that I never learned when to stop giving. When the light turned green, I didn't move. The horn of the car behind me startled me back into motion, and I drove the rest of the way home with both hands tight on the wheel. I tried to remember the first time I'd said yes out of guilt rather than choice. Maybe it was after Walter died. The year Rhea moved back in with the children, exhausted and hollow-eyed, and I told her, I'll help however I can. At the time, it felt like the right thing, a mother's duty. But duty has a way of growing vines. It wraps around every other part of you until you can't see where care ends and self disappears. I parked in front of my house, leaving the engine running for a moment, listening to its low hum. The porch light glowed amber through the fog, the same porch that had once been alive with laughter and sticky fingers from candy apples. It looked peaceful from the outside. Maybe it still was. Inside, the air was still warm from the afternoon. I set the cookies on the counter without unwrapping them. The house made its small nighttime sounds, the click of the old radiator, the shift of wood. I filled the kettle and waited for it to boil, the whistle sharp against the quiet. The tea smelled of chamomile and honey when I poured it into my favorite mug, the one with the tiny crack along the rim. I carried it to the table and opened my planner. The page for October was neat, lined with notes in careful script: doctor's checkup call, Ruth Halloween, 7 p.m. The ink from those words looked too bright, too certain. I reached for my pen, uncapped it slowly, and drew a single line through the page. Beneath the orange circle I'd made weeks ago, I wrote one word in capital letters: enough. I stared at it until the lines blurred, until I could feel something steady returning to me. Not joy, not even relief, but clarity. The kind that comes when you finally realize the house isn't empty. It's just quiet because you stopped filling it with noise that never belonged to you. The kettle hissed once more as it cooled, and I let the sound fade into the night. The next morning arrived pale and quiet, a thin frost glazing the lawn. I woke before dawn the way I always did, when the world still seemed to belong only to those who knew how to listen. The kettle hissed softly on the stove, while the house warmed itself back to life. Steam curled in front of the kitchen window as I sipped my tea. Outside, the maples along the street had dropped half their leaves overnight, scattering them across the road like fragments of old letters. I wondered how long it would take before the branches were bare, how long before I was too. When I went to the bathroom to wash up, the mirror greeted me with its usual surprise. Mornings have a way of showing the truth gently, but without mercy. The woman staring back had silver hair pinned into a loose twist, lines etched deep around the eyes and mouth. Yet her gaze was steady, curious. I leaned closer, tracing one faint line beside my chin. There was no sadness in it, only recognition. The years had done their carving, but they hadn't taken anything I wasn't willing to give. For 30 years, that same reflection had belonged to Principal Hale, the woman who ran assemblies, signed diplomas, comforted crying parents, and calmed entire classrooms with a single look. I used to stand straighter back then, not out of vanity, but out of purpose. Every day required control, clarity, patience. Hundreds of students, dozens of teachers, one name they could trust. And yet at home, I'd learned to make myself small again. To speak softly when Ria's voice grew sharp, to agree when it was easier than explaining why I couldn't. Authority came easy in the halls of the school. It dissolved at the sound of my daughter's sigh. I thought of all the years I'd spent building other people's confidence while quietly misplacing my own. The mirror caught the morning light, and for a moment, I saw both women, the principal and the mother, blended into one. I realized then how easily I'd let myself disappear behind usefulness. It was strange how invisibility could look so much like devotion. I opened the linen drawer and found the old brooch Walter had given me the year I retired, a small silver maple leaf. "Something to remind you that change is a natural act," he'd said, pinning it to my blazer. I'd stopped wearing it after the funeral, as if his words had expired with him. I pinned it to my cardigan, now testing the weight. It wasn't heavy, just certain. The clock ticked toward 8. Somewhere across town, Ria would be packing lunches, managing noise, moving fast as always. The thought didn't bring anger this time, only understanding. She was a product of what I'd taught her: independence without empathy, expectation without balance. And I'd been her best example. I brushed my hair, tied it neatly, and opened the planner still lying on the kitchen counter. The word I'd written last night, "Nuff," looked calmer in daylight, almost beautiful. This Halloween, I decided, there would be no noise I hadn't chosen, no doorbell I hadn't invited. The tradition could rest just this once. When I left the bathroom, the woman in the mirror stayed behind, steady-eyed and whole, as if finally remembering who she was before anyone else decided for her. That afternoon, the sky dimmed early. Clouds hung low over Burlington, thick and heavy with the promise of rain. I decided to stay inside and sort through the drawer by the writing desk, one of those deep, stubborn drawers that swallows papers for decades and never gives them back willingly. It started as a simple chore, the kind people do when the weather turns. But when I pulled the first folder free, a small avalanche of envelopes, notes, and faded receipts tumbled onto the rug. My life in paper form. I sat down slowly, cross-legged on the floor, and began to sift through them. There were check stubs from when I'd helped Ria and Nathan with their first down payment, back when they'd promised to repay every cent once the business takes off. The business had taken off years ago. The repayment never did. I found grocery receipts from nights I'd cooked full dinners after work for Ria's family, then stayed to clean while she rested. Little yellow notes in her handwriting. "Thanks, Mom. You're the best," still clipped to some of the old grocery lists. They looked sweet, but they read like IOUs, never meant to be redeemed. Then came the photos. One after another tucked between bills and holiday cards. Ria's children dressed as pumpkins, witches, superheroes. Each one had been taken on my porch with the decorations I'd bought, the cookies I'd baked, the lights I'd strung. I stared at those pictures until my throat felt tight. The joy in their smiles was real, but the memory behind them carried a quiet fatigue I'd never named. Among the papers, I found one of my old leather-bound journals, edges soft with age. I flipped through the pages and recognized my own handwriting from 20 years ago. I had recorded simple things, then school events, grocery lists, Walter's health updates, but as the years went on, the entries grew more personal. July 5th. Ria called at midnight. Needed me to drive the kids home from the fireworks. Said Nathan was too tired. October 10th. Lent her $800 to fix the car. She promised to pay by Christmas. February 2nd. Sophia's birthday cake. Ria forgot to order one, so I baked it before work. Each line landed like a small bruise. Halfway through the book, I came across one note written in my late husband's handwriting. He'd scribbled it on the corner of a grocery list years ago. "Don't turn generosity into a job description, Mary." I hadn't remembered keeping it. The ink was faded now, but the words still held their edge. I laid the journal flat on my knees and stared at the open pages. The patterns were so clear it was almost embarrassing that I'd missed them before. Every favor had been disguised as love, every request dressed in gratitude. But gratitude without return isn't love, it's reliance. I whispered the words before I even realized they'd left my mouth. That's not love. That's ledger work. The phrase settled in the air like dust after a long movement of furniture disturbing necessary and final. I gathered the receipts and notes into one neat stack and tied them with twine. I didn't need to keep them anymore. The proof wasn't in the paper. It was in me. By evening, the rain had started tapping gently against the kitchen window. I brewed a pot of black tea stronger than usual and sat by the table, watching the drops slide down the glass. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to pick up the phone. I didn't want to check on anyone, remind anyone, fix anything. The kettle clicked off, and the quiet afterward was deep and forgiving. I reached for my planner again, resting my hand over the word I'd written days earlier, enough. It felt truer now, not like defiance, but understanding. Outside, the rain blurred the world into soft outlines, washing everything into balance. By the end of the week, the rain had stopped leaving behind a brightness too clean to trust. The yard smelled of wet leaves and earth, the kind of scent that makes you feel time passing through your bones. I had just settled by the kitchen window with my second cup of coffee when the phone buzzed across the table. Ria's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated before answering. "Morning, sweetheart." Her voice came fast, cheerful, already spinning. "Hi, Mom. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. I just needed to run something by you for Halloween." I could almost hear her multitasking on the other end, papers shuffling, a child calling in the background, her muffled reply of, "Not now, honey," followed by a sigh. Then her tone brightened again, sugar over strain. "So the head count's getting a little bigger than we thought. Nathan's brother's family might stop by, plus the girls from my office. They're bringing their kids too. You know how it goes." "Yes," I said softly. "I do. Right. So I was thinking," she continued, "since you always handle the snacks for the kids, maybe you could help out with food for the adults this year too. Nothing crazy. Just some catering, maybe finger foods or small plates. You've got such great taste, Mom." Her words landed gently, one by one, like coins dropped into an already full jar. I could hear the pattern now, the way every favor sounded like a compliment before it became an expectation. I took a breath. You want me to place the catering order? If it's not too much trouble. You know the local place, Romano's. They did the food for Sophia's baptism years ago. I trust your judgment completely. Completely. The word made me smile, though not for the reason she imagined. And I'll reimburse you once we settle everything from the party? She added quickly, the way she always did when repayment was theoretical. Oh, and don't worry about decorations. You've already done so much just by helping. Helping. The word had started to feel less like a kindness and more like a leash. I reached for a small notepad on the table, jotting down every detail. As she spoke, Romano's small plates, finger foods reimbursement later. I added quotation marks around each phrase, the kind of punctuation that holds more truth than it shows. Sure thing, darling, I said when she finished. Consider it handled. She sounded relieved. You're the best, Mom. Seriously, I don't know what I'd do without you. The line clicked, and the silence that followed felt almost ceremonial. I placed the pen down beside the notepad and looked at the words I'd written. They read like an instruction sheet for my own undoing. Romano's. Small plates. The adults. The kids. Handle it. Outside, a crow landed on the fence, shaking off the water from its wings. I watched it for a while, the way it tilted its head, as if measuring the distance between things. Then I pushed the notepad aside and reached for my planner. The Halloween circle still glowed faintly orange. Beneath enough, I wrote 3 new words, book the cabin. Later that afternoon, I drove into town. The air was sharp, full of wood smoke, and the faint hum of traffic from Church Street. I parked near the post office and walked to a small travel agency I'd passed 100 times, but never entered. Inside, it smelled of pine cleaner and printer ink. A young woman at the desk looked up with a practiced smile. How can I help you today? I smiled back, steady and calm. I'm looking for somewhere quiet, I said. By the lake, maybe, for a few nights. Somewhere I can rest. She typed quickly, then turned the screen toward me. A photo of a small cabin appeared, white shutters, a stone chimney, and water so still it looked like glass. Stillwater Lake Lodge. Available October 30th through November 2nd. I'll take it, I said. When I returned home, the sun was setting. I made myself a simple dinner, soup and bread, and sat by the table again. The notepad was still there, her list untouched. I read it once more and drew a thin line through every item. Then I flipped the page, wrote the name, Stillwater Lake at the top, and underlined it twice. Consider it handled, I whispered. And this time the words finally belonged to me. The following morning arrived with a clear sky, the kind that looked freshly polished after a week of rain. Sunlight cut across the kitchen counter, warming the open pages of my planner. The words Stillwater Lake gleamed faintly in the light. I took another sip of coffee and decided that today, finally, something would move. The cabin manager, a man named Harvey, called to confirm my reservation. His voice carried the kind of patience that comes from living near quiet water. Mrs. Hale, he said, you'll have the place all to yourself. It's off-season, so the lake will be empty except for the loons. Empty sounds. Perfect, I replied. He laughed softly. Most people want fireworks and company. You just want silence, huh? I've had plenty of noise, I said. After we hung up, I logged into my online banking account. The balance looked steady. Years of saving, budgeting, deferring small luxuries. I opened the note Ria had sent me with Romano's catering details. Deposit by Monday morning to confirm the menu. The cost for 30 adults and 9 children was nearly $800 up front. I highlighted the number with my finger, then moved the exact amount into a new transaction labeled Stillwater Lodge Reservation. I pressed confirm. The sound of the digital ding was quiet, almost shy, but something in me straightened at it. My chest loosened as if I'd been holding my breath for decades. For once, The money was going towards something that asked nothing from me. By noon, the house had filled with sunlight. I took the cookie tin from the high shelf and set it on the counter. The twine was still tied neatly around the lid. I untied it and took one out. It was dry now, but the taste was sweet, just enough to remind me that small kindnesses don't have to belong to anyone else. Around 2 o'clock, I dialed Romano's. The woman who answered had a bright, efficient voice. "Romano's Catering, this is Clara speaking." "Hello, Clara. This is Meridian Hale. I need to cancel an order that was supposed to be placed today." "Oh, of course. May I ask the reason for cancellation?" I smiled faintly. The guest list changed. She apologized for the non-refundable deposit policy, promised a partial return within the week, and thanked me for calling ahead. I thanked her back and ended the call. My pulse felt oddly steady, like I'd just completed something sacred. Outside, the wind picked up again, scattering yellow leaves down the driveway. They looked like slips of paper torn from an old account book. For years, I'd treated life as a ledger, balancing favors, debts, apologies. But for the first time, I realized I didn't owe anyone a single thing. I spent the rest of the afternoon packing a small suitcase. Clothes for cool weather, a book of Wendell Berry poems, my teapot, a single wool blanket Walter and I had taken on every road trip. I slipped a photograph of him into the front pocket, the one where he's laughing at something off camera, his face open and unguarded. By evening, the bag sat by the door. I opened my notebook and wrote in clean, deliberate script, "Absence, the only correction that teaches." The words looked calmer than they sounded in my head. They didn't feel like rebellion. They felt like balance, as if silence had been waiting all these years for its turn to speak. Before bed, I walked out to the porch and looked up at the maple branches waving in the wind. The air smelled like pine and smoke from a neighbor's chimney. Somewhere down the block, a child's laughter echoed faintly through the dusk. For the first time in months, it didn't sound like something I was missing. It sounded like something I'd finally released. The next few days passed like pages turning on their own. I didn't announce my plans. There was no need. The world around me carried on as if I'd already agreed to everything. That was the quiet magic of assumption. It worked best when the target didn't resist. By Wednesday morning, my phone began its steady hum of notifications. "Ria Mom, just checking you'll pick up the catering order Friday." "Right, Nathan. We'll drop the folding tables at your place in case the kids eat there first." Ria again. "Could you also have cocoa ready? The kids love your recipe." Each message landed with the soft weight of inevitability. Not one contained a question mark. I read them all, hovering over the screen, and typed back only 2 words. "Sounds lovely." The phrase worked like a charm, non-committal, warm, safe. It was the same tone I'd used for years, the one that let me survive Ria's chaos without starting fires. But this time, the words didn't cost me. They were a curtain, not an invitation. By afternoon, she sent another flurry of updates, head counts, costumes, candy, preferences, the name of a magician she'd booked for the children. I replied once more, "Sounds lovely." She didn't notice. That night, I opened my closet and took out my travel bag again. I folded my clothes carefully, jeans, sweaters, the blue scarf Walter had bought me at the Shelburne Fair. The motions felt deliberate, almost ceremonial. I packed my mug, a small tin of tea, and the notebook I'd written in the day before. When I closed the zipper, the sound felt final. On Thursday, the phone kept buzzing. Ria had moved on to discussing decorations. "Mom, if you could put up the spiderweb lights again, that would be amazing. You always make things feel so cozy." I smiled at the irony. Coziness had become my currency in this family, a soft blanket thrown over everyone else's mess. Midday, my neighbor Ruth stopped by to return a casserole dish I'd lent her weeks ago. She was a tall woman in her 80s, sharp as frost. "You heading somewhere, Mary?" she asked, glancing at the suitcase by the door. Just taking a few days by the lake, I said. Good for you. She nodded, then lowered her voice. You deserve to breathe your own air for once. I thanked her and promised to bring her something back, though I didn't know if I would. The lake wasn't a place for souvenirs. It was for erasing what shouldn't have been written in the first place. That evening, I made one last circuit of the house. I unplugged the coffee maker, locked the back door, and turned off the porch light. That switch had stayed on for years, my silent signal to family friends and trick-or-treaters alike. You're welcome here. The bulb went dark with a faint click. The house instantly looked different, more private, almost younger. I sat at the kitchen table and opened my notebook. Beneath the line I'd written, "Absence, the only correction that teaches," I added a new one. Light off. When the phone rang again, I didn't pick it up. I watched it buzz against the wooden table screen, glowing like a small pulse in the dark. It eventually stopped, then lit again. A minute later, another message, another plan, another assumption. I poured myself a final cup of tea before bed, steadying my hands as the steam rose. Outside, the street was empty, just the faint flicker of jack-o'-lanterns glowing from other porches. Mine stood unlit, its smile unseen. By the time I turned out the kitchen light, the house felt weightless, as if it had been waiting all along for this single, deliberate quiet. I left before sunrise on October 30th, while the street lamps still glowed faintly over empty sidewalks. The world was quiet, washed in that thin gray light that comes before dawn. My bag sat in the passenger seat, buckled in like a silent companion. The thermos of tea beside it steamed softly, filling the car with the scent of honey and chamomile. The first turn out of Burlington took me past the elementary school where I used to work. The playground was deserted swings hanging still in the cold air. I remembered my last day there, the applause, the bouquet of carnations, the cake the staff had ordered with thank you. Principal Hale piped in shaky icing. I had left that place certain I'd earned my rest. Yet somehow the years that followed had filled with new duties, just smaller and quieter ones hidden inside love. The highway opened up as I headed north. Frost glittered on the edges of the guardrails, and the fields stretched wide and pale beneath a pink horizon. Vermont, in late October, always looked suspended between seasons, half dying, half burning with color. As I drove, the radio found a signal from a station out of Montpelier. The opening notes of Time After Time floated through the speakers. Cyndi Lauper's voice carried softly through the cold morning, familiar and aching. I whispered the words under my breath, then stopped midway and said something else instead. No more. It came out barely audible, but the sound filled the small space between me and the windshield. For the first time, it didn't sound like defiance. It sounded like relief. The road curved past a small diner I used to take Rhea to when she was a teenager. It still had the same hand-painted sign, Maple and Slate Cafe Breakfast all day. I could almost see her there again, sitting across from me in her soccer uniform, complaining about homework and boys. Back then, she'd ask me if I ever regretted being strict, and I'd tell her that boundaries were a form of care. I hadn't realized then how much easier it was to teach that lesson than to live it. By the time the sun climbed higher, the sky had turned the color of brushed copper. I stopped at a gas station near Barton to stretch my legs. The clerk, a young man with a red knit cap, looked up from his magazine and smiled politely. Heading up north. Ma'am, to Stillwater Lake, I said. He nodded. Beautiful spot this time of year. Gets real quiet after the leaves fall. That's exactly what I'm counting on. Back in the car, I turned off the radio and let the quiet take over. The hum of the tires became a rhythm steady and sure. For miles, I saw nothing but forest red maples, giving way to bare birches, their branches black against the pale sky. Every mile felt like a layer of something old peeling away. When the lake finally came into view, it appeared suddenly like a mirror dropped between mountains. The water was still a perfect reflection of everything above it, sky trees and light. A single wooden dock jutted out into the water, empty, but waiting. The cabin sat just beyond a line of pines, small and square, smoke already curling from its chimney. Harvey, the manager, had said he'd light the fire before I arrived. He'd kept his promise. I parked by the gate and turned off the engine. The silence that followed was immense, pressing softly against the car windows. For a long moment, I just sat there, my hands resting on the steering wheel. The road behind me was invisible now, hidden by trees. I thought of Rhea, of the texts still unanswered on my phone, of the noise I'd left behind. Then I took a deep breath, opened the door, and stepped out into the cold. The air smelled of pine and smoke and the faint sweetness of lake water. Each step toward the cabin felt lighter, as though I were walking out of someone else's story and back into my own. Halloween afternoon arrived quiet and pale, the lake covered in a skin of silver mist. The air was so still that even the birches looked frozen mid-breath. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned down to soft orange coals. I sat at the small wooden table with a cup of tea, watching steam drift through a shaft of light that cut across the floorboards. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing anywhere. No grocery lists, no timers, no sticky fingers tugging at my sleeve. The silence had a weight to it, a kind that filled every corner until there was nothing left to want. Around 3 o'clock, my phone began to vibrate on the table. The sound was faint, just a small hum against the wood, but it broke through the stillness like a bell in a church. The screen flashed Rhea. I stared at it, the name pulsing. A part of me, the mother part. The trained responder reached instinctively, but I stopped. The phone rang again, louder this time. When I finally answered, her voice burst through before I could speak. "Mom, oh my God, where are you? The kids are all here waiting. We've been calling for hours. The food's supposed to arrive any minute, and the caterer says the order was canceled. What's going on?" I took a slow sip of tea before replying. "Good afternoon, sweetheart." "Mom, this isn't funny. Everyone's here. Nathan's furious. The kids are crying because they thought you were making cocoa. What happened to the catering? Did you forget to confirm it?" "I didn't forget," I said. Her voice sharpened. "Then why would they say the order was canceled?" "Because I canceled it." There was a pause, and in that pause I could hear her entire life rearranging itself. Confusion first, then anger. "You what?" I set the cup down gently. "I canceled it. I wasn't planning on coming." "Not coming," she repeated like she didn't understand the meaning of the words. "You mean you're not coming now?" "The party's already started. I mean, I'm not coming at all." Her breath caught, then came out sharp and ragged. "Mom, this is insane. You can't just disappear like this. Everyone's depending on you." "You promised I didn't promise anything I said. You decided." There was the sound of movement in the background voices, children shouting, a door slamming. Rhea's tone dropped lower and harder. "I can't believe you do this to us. To your grandchildren. We've built everything around you being here, and now you're just on vacation." "Yes," I said. "Exactly that." She exhaled a small, incredulous laugh. "This isn't you. You love being part of things. You love the kids. I do love them. But I also love peace." Silence followed. I imagined her standing in the middle of the kitchen, surrounded by chaos, still trying to find the version of me she recognized, the one who never said no, who filled gaps before anyone noticed them. That woman had vanished somewhere on the drive north. Finally, her voice came again, smaller. "Mom, we can't do this without you." I looked toward the window. The mist had lifted slightly, revealing the still surface of the lake. My reflection swayed faintly across it, thin, calm, untethered. "You can," I said softly. "And maybe you should." She didn't speak. A faint sound of a child crying carried through the line, followed by the low murmur of Nathan's voice in the background. Rhea's breathing turned uneven. "So that's it. You're just leaving us to deal with everything. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. Don't wait, I said. Not for me. Or the treats. Then I pressed the red button and set the phone face down. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Then the sound of the lake returned, a low lap of water against the dock, the faint whisper of wind in the trees. I sat there listening until my pulse matched its rhythm. The phone buzzed again, once, then twice, before finally falling silent. Outside, the sky began to darken, and somewhere across the water, a loon called out a long, hollow note that rose and disappeared into the hills. I stood by the window until the sound faded, then reached for my sweater and lit a single candle on the table. Its flame flickered once, then steadied, glowing quietly against the darkening glass. At Ria's house, the air smelled of sugar and smoke. Balloons sagged against the ceiling, their ribbons tangled in the chandelier. 9 children filled the living room, some crying, some chasing one another in circles, all wearing costumes that were already unraveling. A paper witch hat had torn in half. A pirate sword lay under the couch. Ria moved through the chaos like someone trying to command a storm with a whisper. Her blouse was stained with cider, her hair coming loose from its clip. Tommy, stop running. Sophia, no, don't pour that. Where's the extra candy bowl? Her voice cracked halfway through the last question. Nathan stood by the window staring at his phone. They're out of pizza at Romano's, he muttered. Something about a canceled order backlog. Ria spun toward him. Then go somewhere else. We can't serve chips and apples to 30 people. 30, he said, glancing up. It's not my fault you invited half the neighborhood. Another shriek filled the room. One of the younger kids had knocked over the bowl of caramel apples. The sticky syrup spread across the hardwood floor, catching on the tulle of a princess costume. Mom, my dress, the girl wailed. Ria dropped to her knees with a towel, muttering curses under her breath. From outside came the faint sound of knocking parents arriving with more children, their voices bright and oblivious. Nathan opened the door to greet them, smiling too widely. Hey, come on in. Sorry, we're still setting up. Where's your mom? One of the women asked as she stepped inside. She usually has everything looking perfect by now. She's not feeling well, Ria said quickly, standing up. But we're fine. The woman raised an eyebrow, glancing around at the scattered decorations and half-empty platters. Ah, well, it looks lively. By the time the sun went down, the house had grown louder than any carnival. The magician Ria had hired texted that he'd lost power downtown and couldn't make it. The string lights outside flickered, then died completely. Without the porch light glowing as it had in every previous year, trick-or-treaters skipped their house entirely. The front yard sat in shadow, silent, except for the sound of Ria's voice calling from the kitchen, her patience unraveling with each word. In the dining room, the cider spilled again, dripping off the table like a slow leak. Someone knocked over the jack-o'-lantern, smearing wax across the floor. The children's laughter dissolved into crying once more. By 8 o'clock, several parents had gathered their kids and begun to leave early. They murmured polite goodbyes, offering half-smiles that couldn't hide their relief. Out on the sidewalk, neighbors whispered under the orange glow of the streetlights. I heard her mom canceled the catering, one said. Really, Meridian? She's never missed a year. Well, maybe she finally got tired. About time, another replied, not unkindly. Inside, Ria stood at the window listening to the muffled chatter. The house behind her looked wrecked, wrappers on the floor, candles burned low, a plastic spiderweb drooping from the mantel. Nathan came up behind her, voice low. Maybe you should call your mom. Ria didn't answer. Her phone sat face down on the counter, dozens of unread messages glowing faintly beneath the glass. She picked it up once, then set it back down. Outside, the laughter from other houses carried easily through the cold night air. Families gathered around porches, sharing cocoa stories, comfort. For the first time in years, hers wasn't one of them. She turned off the kitchen light and stood still, surrounded by the sound of her own party falling apart, realizing too late that every assumption had been built on a single word that never came. The night at Stillwater Lake was quiet enough to hear the water breathing. The air outside had dropped below freezing, and thin ribbons of frost traced the edges of the window pane. Inside the cabin, the fire had settled into a steady rhythm, its glow stretching across the room, like an old companion, finally remembering how to rest. I sat wrapped in a wool blanket, the same one Walter and I had used on our autumn trips years ago. The chair creaked softly beneath me. On the small wooden table beside the hearth lay his leather-bound journal. Its cover scuffed its edges, feathered from decades of being opened and closed. I hadn't read it in years, not since the funeral. For the longest time, I'd believed that some memories stayed kinder when left unopened. But that night felt different. The silence around me wasn't asking for answers. It was asking for witnesses. I opened the book to the middle where his handwriting leaned slightly to the right, confident, but tired. The entry was dated October 28, 1996. Meridian worries too much about being liked. She doesn't see that respect is quieter, slower, but stronger. People trust her to hold things together, but I wish she'd let something fall just once so she could see what survives. I ran my fingers over the words, the indentations in the paper, like the faint pulse of something still alive. For a long time, I just watched the fire reflect off the ink, the orange light turning each word into a small ember. Walter had always seen me more clearly than I saw myself. Even now, years after he was gone, he was still right. I had spent so much of my life stitching over everyone else's cracks, never realizing that I'd been sewing myself shut in the process. I turned a few more pages and found his last entry before his illness worsened. It was short. Love is correction, not punishment. Correction is proof that you still believe someone can do better. The words landed softly, but stayed like the last note of a song that doesn't quite fade. I took my pen from the nightstand and for the first time wrote directly beneath his line. Correction is still a form of care. I capped the pen, closed the journal, and set it back on the table. The weight of it felt balanced now, his voice and mine side by side. The fire cracked once, and the scent of pine resin drifted through the room. Outside, a wind moved across the lake gentle enough to stir the reeds without breaking them. I pulled the blanket tighter, feeling the warmth of the fire spread through my hands. For years I had mistaken peace for permission, waiting for others to grant it. But now it came uninvited quiet, complete, and mine alone. I climbed into bed, leaving the fire to burn low. The lake murmured softly beyond the window, and the reflection of the moon drifted across the ceiling like a pulse of light. When sleep came, it was steady and unbroken, like a door finally closing on the right side of the story. 3 days after Halloween, the lake had turned to glass again. The mornings came slower now, the sun late to rise, and the frost on the porch steps lingered past noon. I was packing my bag to leave when I heard the tires on gravel, the sound of a car pulling up the narrow cabin road. For a moment, I thought it might be Harvey checking on me, but the engine was too loud, the slam of the doors too sharp. Then came the footsteps, quick, uneven, familiar. The knock rattled the cabin's quiet. When I opened the door, Rhea stood there, her coat unbuttoned, her hair still wind-blown from the drive. Nathan hovered behind her, his jaw tight, eyes fixed somewhere over my shoulder, as if staring down an invisible jury. "Mom," she said, breath fogging in the cold. "We need to talk." I stepped aside and gestured toward the fire. "You might as well come in. It's cold out." She brushed past me, the scent of expensive perfume clinging to her anger. Nathan followed reluctantly, standing by the door like a man forced into a play he didn't audition for. Rhea turned to me. "Do you have any idea what you did?" I met her gaze, calm and even. I believe I do. You humiliated us. Her voice broke at the edges. You left us to handle everything. 9 kids, no food, no light. People were whispering all night. Neighbors, friends. Do you know what that felt like? I folded my hands in front of me. Probably a lot like what I've felt for years trying to hold something together while everyone assumed I'd just keep doing it. That's not the same thing. It's exactly the same thing, I said quietly. You just noticed it this time because it was yours to fix. Nathan shifted his weight, clearing his throat. We're not here to fight. We just look Ria's upset, but you could have at least told us. A text. Something. I turned to him, voice steady. When have you ever needed my permission to use me, Nathan? He opened his mouth to respond, then stopped. Ria's eyes filled with tears, though the anger beneath them didn't soften. I don't understand how you could just disappear. You've always been there, Mom. Always. I nodded slowly. Yes, and you never asked why. She took a step closer. We needed you. No, Ria, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You depended on me. There's a difference. Her tears fell freely now, but she didn't look away. You could have ruined everything. The kids cried for you all night. I didn't ruin it, I said, and my words came clear even through the quiet. I just stopped fixing what you broke. The sentence hung between us, heavy as iron. Nathan looked down at the floorboards, his face drawn. Ria pressed her palms to her face, shaking her head. You don't mean that. I do, I said. And I mean this too, I love you. But love isn't supposed to erase a person. I can't keep being everyone's convenience. The wind outside picked up brushing snow off the roof in a soft hiss. Inside, the fire popped a single ember leaping onto the hearthstone. I bent to nudge it back into the flame, the gesture small and practiced. Ria's voice came again, quieter now. So that's it. You're just done. I'm not done, I said, straightening. I'm beginning again. There's a difference. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Nathan placed a hand on her shoulder. Let's go, he murmured. Ria turned to the door, but before leaving, she looked back at me. Her expression caught between hurt and understanding, like someone realizing too late that the walls she leaned on were made of another person's strength. The door shut softly behind them. The car engine started, then faded down the road until there was only the sound of wind and water again. I stood there for a while, the echo of their footsteps dissolving into the quiet. Then I closed the door, turned the lock, and let the fire warm the silence they'd left behind. 2 weeks later, Burlington had folded into winter. The first snow came quiet and heavy, covering every branch, every fence, every sound. I had returned from the lake days earlier, the cabin key still in my coat pocket, the echo of still water lingering behind my thoughts. The house looked different when I stepped inside again. It wasn't larger or cleaner, just more honest. The silence no longer felt like absence. It felt like order. For the first time in years, I left the porch light off without guilt. That morning, as I sat with tea, a knock came at the door. Soft, tentative. When I opened it, Ria stood there, her breath visible in the cold, a knitted scarf wound twice around her neck. She looked tired, smaller somehow, the kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from sleepless nights, but from carrying too much pride for too long. "Hi, Mom," she said. "Come in," I answered. She stepped inside her boots, leaving small crescents of melted snow on the mat. For a long moment, we didn't speak. The kettle whistled in the background, and I poured her a cup before she asked. She wrapped her hands around it, letting the steam fog her glasses. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began quietly. "About not fixing what we broke." I nodded. "You were right," she continued. "The kids kept asking where you were. I told them you needed a rest, but the truth is, I didn't even know what that meant. I guess I never thought of you as someone who needed anything." "That's exactly the problem," I said, not unkindly. She looked up, her eyes glassy. I didn't mean to take advantage, She faltered. It's like we built this rhythm and I forgot to notice it was you doing all the counting. I reached for the small notepad I'd placed on the table earlier, folded neatly beside my planner. It wasn't premeditated, just something I'd written days ago when I was deciding how to live from now on. I slid it across to her. She unfolded it carefully, reading the words written in my handwriting, by invitation, not assumption. Her fingers lingered on the paper. I mean, if you want me in your life, I said you ask. You don't assign. You don't assume I'll be there to patch things. I'll help when it's my choice, not my obligation. She nodded slowly, her gaze steady but uncertain. And if I mess up, then you call, I said. And we talk. No more expectations hidden in kindness. No more guilt disguised as family. The fire crackled in the hearth, filling the silence between us. She folded the note and slipped it into her pocket like something fragile. I don't know if I can change everything overnight, she whispered. Neither can I said. But change starts small, like leaving one light off to see if the house still feels like home. Her eyes softened at that. The kids miss you. So do I. I miss them too, I said. But they'll see me when it's time, when the visit is planned, not assumed. Rhea nodded again, then stood hesitating by the door. Do you still want me to come by next weekend? If you call first, I replied. For the first time in years, she smiled. Faint, genuine, a little cracked, but real. She stepped into the cold snowflakes catching in her hair and paused at the gate before turning back. Thanks for the tea, she said. Any time I answered, and meant it. When the door closed, I watched her footprints disappear into the falling snow. The note's absence on the table left behind only the indentation of where it had been, a small, perfect rectangle of cleared space. I poured myself another cup of tea and looked out at the yard where the snow kept falling, erasing old paths so new ones could form. By December, the first true snow had come to Burlington. It blanketed the porch railings, softened the sharp corners of the fence, and turned the street into a quiet ribbon of white. The lake beyond the hill was half frozen now, its surface broken only by the occasional ripple from a passing bird. The world had slowed to the rhythm I'd been craving for years. A small brass plaque gleamed beside my front door, newly polished. It read in neat engraved letters, "Home by invitation only." The man at the hardware shop had smiled when he handed it to me. Seems wise, he'd said. Boundaries are just fences built out of kindness. I had nodded. It wasn't defiance, it was order. The house no longer felt like a station waiting for trains that never stopped. It felt inhabited, balanced, and mine. I kept the porch light off most nights now. It had become a symbol of sorts, a way to honor the quiet, not the crowd. The absence of glow didn't mean rejection. It meant I had learned when to rest. Most mornings I read by the window while the kettle simmered. Letters still arrived from friends and old colleagues, bits of news from the world outside my stillness. Rhea hadn't written since the day she left, but last week I received a package from her, a box of tea, the same blend I'd served her that snowy morning. There was no note, just a label on the tin that read, "For calm days." Today, though, something different arrived, a small postcard bent slightly at the corners. The front showed a watercolor of a snowman wearing a bright orange scarf. On the back, written in a child's uneven scrawl, were just 4 words. "We missed your stories." No signature, but I recognized the handwriting. It was Leah Rhea's eldest, now old enough to write, but still young enough to mean every word. I turned the card over, tracing the little smudge of ink where her name would have been. Then I smiled, the kind of smile that starts slow and ends somewhere deep inside the ribs. I set the postcard under my teacup to keep it flat, watching the faint ring of steam darken the paper. Outside, the lake shimmered under the pale winter light, a single beam of sun slipping through the clouds. The wind shifted, carrying with it the distant sound of children laughing down the street, muffled, harmless, alive. For once, the echo didn't ache. It blended with the rhythm of the kettle, the tick of the clock, the soft hum of a home that no longer asked anything of me. I leaned back, hands around my cup, and let the moment stretch into stillness. Peace, I realized, wasn't the absence of family. It was the presence of choice. The brass plaque by the door caught a glint of sunlight gleaming like quiet punctuation at the end of a long sentence finally finished. And somewhere beyond the window, the lake kept its promise calm, reflective, unbroken.